Okay, that seems good. Kia ora, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name's Joyce. I'm super happy to be here, and I'm really grateful to the organizers for inviting me and to Rolling Stone for having this event. That's pretty cool. I am going to turn my timer on so that I don't talk too much. Right. So I am a marine geochemist, which means I study the chemistry of the ocean and chemistry of the ocean in the past, chemistry of the ocean in the future, and how it impacts marine life. That's me, age 18. I grew up in Austin, Texas, so behind me there are some bluebonnets, which are related to the invasive lupins here, but there we love them. They're the state flower. And I put that photo up to tell you guys that I grew up further from the ocean than anywhere in New Zealand, which I'll come back to. And the middle picture is of a coral reef. So while I was in primary school, my school participated in a program for marine education. I got super into the ocean. I had a high school science teacher that was super keen on the ocean. And so I went to the University of Miami, about 2,000 kilometers away, for marine science for uni. And while I was there, I learned that marine scientists are mostly studying the demise of a lot of marine environments because of climate change in particular. And that middle picture is kind of cheating. It's not a reef in Miami because reefs in Miami, one, don't have those species of corals, but also I never saw a reef that healthy in Miami. That reef is from Fiji a couple years ago. So someone erroneously told me while I was an undergrad that in order to be a scientist, I had to get a PhD. And I say erroneously because there are many other ways to be a scientist. But that is what I did. I went and got a PhD, and rather than working on modern marine science, I decided to do past marine science, which is basically earth science. So you look at rocks to see what the history of the earth is. So those rocks on the right panel they were deposited when they were in the seafloor, and that's what I did. And I still can't see my timer. It's making me nervous. Okay. All right, that's better. Okay, so then I moved here after I finished. And this is some kelp from Stewart Island. It's nice. Kelp photosynthesizes. And this is the part of the talk where I make sure we're all on the same page about what the carbon cycle is. So in geologic time frames, carbon dioxide, CO2, the greenhouse gas that we argue about a lot these days, comes out of volcanoes. It enters the atmosphere, and then it goes into the ocean. So the ocean and the atmosphere are in equilibrium. Same amount of CO2 concentration either place. While it's in the surface ocean, it gets taken up by kelp, but also a lot of phytoplankton. So phytoplankton is pulling in CO2, making their bodies, and then getting eaten by zooplankton, so plankton that are animals, zoo. And from there, it might be eaten by larger animals. It might sink to the bottom of the ocean. And if it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, it has a chance of getting preserved as what we call organic carbon in earth science and making it into the rock record. And so those rocks, the black layers in particular, they have a lot of organic matter in them. If you scratch them, they smell like oil. That's where oil comes from. So just a reminder, we're disrupting the global carbon cycle when we burn fossil fuels. So that changes climate and ocean chemistry. Okay, so in this talk, I'm going to try to put together two things I'm working on that are kind of separate for me, so wish me luck. Okay, this is another photo from Stewart Island, an octopus, a feke. I love this picture because the water is clear. There's a couple of types of seaweed. There is rocks with coral and algae, and the octopus was staying still because it had something to eat. So it was more interested in eating than it was afraid of me, which was awesome. And when I moved to Otatahi 6 years ago, I was like, sweet, right by the ocean. I'm going to see a lot of cool animals, and I love diving. Wrong. Lyttelton Harbour has a lot of sediment in it, and the water is not very clear. So I had to improvise slightly, and because kind of selfishly I wanted to see some marine animals, but also because I started getting interested in why there's not more marine research going on in New Zealand, and also thinking about in marine science as a whole, it's quite expensive to collect samples, and I think that the public could have a lot more input into collecting marine samples and helping out with science, and I think that's true of all types of science. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'll start a little project here to look at marine invertebrates in the harbor, because I like them and because they're easy to look at. And it turned into this whole thing. So all these people and organizations have contributed in some way. And yeah, that's what the first part of this talk is about. So the question I wanted to know first is who's in the harbor? So by who, I mean what little marine invertebrates, because I like them, and also because they're very susceptible to ocean chemistry, which is also what I care about. And then why are they in the harbor? And why not? So I like this photo. This is looking kind of away, like I think the mouth of the harbor is like down at the end, and then looking towards the ocean. And it's pretty, but it also has gorse in the foreground. And so it's my reminder to say the harbor before European colonization was still totally forested and then was deforested. And there are some areas that are being reforested, but I guess my kind of driving hypothesis here is that the sediment input into the harbor makes it very hard to live if you are an organism there. So I put out some marine invertebrate hotels. I brought one with me, but I forgot to bring it up here. But they're small. They're like this big. That's the cute name that Brent Barrett gave them. But they're just tiles, drilled a hole in the middle of the tiles, and then put them together. And what they become is what we call settling plates. This is a very common method of seeing what marine organisms are in an area easily. And I just hung them from floating docks. So super cheap, super easy, because when I started the project, I did it with my own money. But you could use anything. As my friend told me, you could use a hairbrush. So there's nothing special about the tiles. And I put them out for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a year, some of them. And over time, they start to get colonized by marine organisms, and they become a little community that I can then pull out and look at. Why does that happen? Because a lot of marine animals start their lives as plankton. So there's a lot of like hot shots here. There's like a snail, an anemone, tunicate fish, a polychaete worm, a shrimp. This is a larva of a sea urchin, a crab. So all of these guys start as plankton, and then they're looking for somewhere to land when they get a little bigger. So when you put a hard surface out, you are providing new habitat, and so anyone with a boat knows that indeed anything will land on your boat and colonize it if it can. It's not a perfect system because the normal marine environments in New Zealand are seagrass, kelp, rocks. There's a bunch of paua down here, also Stewart Island. Maybe you're living in the open water, and maybe you're a benthic organism living in the sand or silt or something. But we could still look at something fun. So here's what one of these tiles look like. They're 7 by 7 centimeters. They're small, and basically everything you can see here is an animal. And I'll just click through some of these. So, oh my God. This is a polychaete worm. This is a big predator here. This is also a polychaete worm, blue feather worm. There's one over here. That's a filter feeder. Excuse me. In the center, you can't really see it, but there's a couple of half crabs, so that's what those are. They're all over the place. You've probably seen them when you're tide pooling. This is a tunicate or a sea squirt. I see those a lot. And this is another type of colonial sea squirt. So they're much smaller and they grow in a colony, but that's what that is. And some barnacles. So that's, a crustacean related to crabs and things like that. But they live attached to things and they feed with their feet. And then a bryozoan, some more worms. So tons of animals is the point. And hopefully, well, maybe, animals that you may not have thought of very often. But the harbor is full of little animals. The sites are different, so I put, tiles out at several different sites around the harbor. At Naval Point, for some reason that I'm still thinking about, they're just covered in amphipods. They make all these burrows. That's like all that's there. At the marina, it's super diverse, which I was surprised about. So this is like the interior of the marina where a lot of yachties boats stay. Super diverse, high growth rate, always interesting stuff there. And then in Monk's Bay, the Christchurch Yacht Club, there was super fast growth rate that I can never keep up with. There's just like tons of algae, but also tons of animals. And they also have a lot of these tunicates. So hopefully you're asking yourself, I can come up with some ideas about why these sites are different. And that's kind of the next step here for this project is thinking about, why would the sites be different? So for Naval Point, it's out in the more open water, so it's getting a lot of exchange with the open ocean relative to the kind of inner harbor sites. It's getting a lot of wave action, so whatever is there, it's getting a little bit more battered. The marina is in kind of a very still place, and perhaps with less sediment input, but also it's sitting in the water with a lot of pollutants for it, so that most antifoul that you put on the bottom of the boat is copper-based. It's copper-based because that's toxic to marine life, and so because it wants to inhibit growth. And so a lot of the things that we see in the marina are non-native species that thrive in harbors all over the world because they're tolerant to them. But I was surprised how diverse it is. Monk's Bay, you can probably put together, there's a lot of nutrients coming in from freshwater. It's at the estuary mouth. So that's the kind of thing I'm thinking about. I heard a whakatoki from someone at Nite ChCh that really stuck with me, and I don't have the exact quote, but basically it says that you used to be able to walk from Quail Island, Otamahua, to the peninsula nearby on the back of hammerheads. So the point is there used to be a lot of hammerheads in Whakaraupō Lyttleton Harbour, and there are not now. And so what I think when I hear that is they probably lost a lot of their food. There's probably been a disruption to the food chain, among other things. But I think it's a really interesting thing to think about, because it can be slightly crazy making to be well, maybe this is how it always has been, maybe not. But we have information from people who were here before, and even people who were here 30 or 40 years ago have said, there was lots of crayfish, there was lots of paua before. So this slide is a pretty bad graphic that I made, but it's supposed to be specific to the Whakaraupō. It's just supposed to say, marine food webs are complex, so if we change water chemistry, if we change sediment loading, a lot of things can be impacted, and then of course our top predators might leave and go elsewhere. I really like this food web diagram. If you look at marine food web diagrams, they're all hilariously complicated. But anyways, the point is, large animals need a lot of food. It's got to be somewhere. They're going to go somewhere else if we can't get it here. And if you're starting your life as a very small planktonic organism, you're really susceptible to marine pollution, to ocean acidification, to nutrient changes. So that's something to think about. Something also to think about is if your benthic habitat, your rocks are covered in sediment, and you can't leave the rock, you cannot live. That's what's going on in Whakaraupō. That's an ongoing project that I could say a lot more about. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that ocean chemistry impacts marine life, and also what we do locally impacts marine life. And I'm going to go quickly for this next part. So my real day job is looking at the role that animals that live in the twilight zone of the ocean play in the carbon cycle. And this work is through the Environmental Defense Fund and Cornell in the US, and it's funded by this couple. So if you're filthy rich, that's something you could do with your money, is fund people like me. So this part of my work is very modeling based, and it's globally focused. So it's very different, and both of these projects are kind of in the still happening phase. So you could see me in 6 months and I could have very different answers for you. This is other people's work right now. So the ocean twilight zone, if you haven't heard about it recently, this is the zone of the ocean where 1% of light penetrates. So it's pretty deep. It's 200 to 1,000 meters deep. It's deep for us, but there's still another 3,000 meters to go. And a lot of the animals that live there are little fish. So these are about the size of our pinky. They're not very big. They're called myctophids or lanternfish. And I don't always use the term lanternfish because people think of the anglerfish with the little light, but those are down there too, so you can think of them. And these guys also light up. And it turns out they're one of the most numerous animals on the planet. And we figured this out very recently, that maybe up to 90% of fish biomass in the ocean are these guys living in this deeper part of the ocean than we knew about. It's pretty cool how we figured this out is with sonar. So this is a sonar scan. This is a weird graph because it's kind of showing depth over here and then time going this way. But what you can see here is there's this big reflective pattern and then it goes up. So basically what this is showing is that these fish live deep down during the day and then they swim up at night. So what's happening is they are living deep to avoid predators, and then they swim up to the surface to take advantage of the food web that starts in the surface ocean with phytoplankton and zooplankton. So they're swimming up to eat, they're swimming back down a kilometer, kind of at the twilight time of day to avoid predators. And then because they've swam up and eaten all this food and then swam back down, they're pooping, they're dying at depth. And the part of the carbon cycle that is slowly sinking particles in the ocean gets sped up because of them. So we're starting to think that they may be responsible for 10 to 30% of carbon sequestration in certain areas of the ocean, but that's a very active area of research. So yeah, here's this little food chain that myctophids are participating in. So I think it's amazing that these fish are playing such a big role in the carbon cycle. Maybe they also play massive ecological roles, as you could imagine, and they're impacting climate. If you think about all of our CO2 that we're putting into the atmosphere, a lot of that is going to get sequestered by these fish. So if you're like me, you're that's cool. But if you own a fish meal company, you're oh, ka-ching. So 1 minute primer on this aspect of global fisheries is that we catch a lot of fish, and some of it is eaten directly for direct human consumption, and a lot of it is also used for things like fish meal and non-human consumption. And so basically a lot of fish is turned into, ground up into a powder and fed to aquaculture. For a while it was chickens, for a while it was pigs, but there's this big global fish meal production. And a lot of those fish are these guys. These are Peruvian anchoveta. This is what we call a reduction fishery. So even though 90% of a reduction fishery is human edible, we feed a lot to aquaculture. So that's just something to think about, where's our food coming from? Because basically this anchoveta fishery booms and busts a lot. And so there's a concern that the mesopelagic fish, the twilight zone fish, are going to be the next potential gold mine for fish food. There's a lot more to say about that, but you can ask me at the break. I was told 2 things in a recent workshop about public speaking. One was move around less, which I'll give myself a C on tonight. And the second one was have a call to action. So what can you do? You know, you've just heard, maybe you already knew, but maybe you've just heard that the ocean is playing this big role in the carbon cycle. Also, it complicated matters by telling you that there's all these fish helping, but maybe we're going to eat them all. Maybe we're going to feed them all to salmon. So what can you do? The number one thing is vote for people who are going to put in good freshwater policy in the city and plant some trees. Tell your friends to vote for people who are going to have good freshwater policies for the city. I can make some recommendations to you if you want. New Zealand has a massive area of legal jurisdiction over the ocean, so I'd love to see New Zealand increase its leadership in good fisheries policy and CO2 emissions reduction, and then globally we really need to, cut CO2 emissions, have good fisheries policy, things like that. Okay, happy to answer any questions later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Joyce Yager. So now we've got a question and answer section. If you just want to put up your hand, we'll bring a microphone to you, and then you can ask your question.
Yeah, with your hand up.
So we know that the reefs in Australia are dying. How is the sea around New Zealand doing? I know there's not necessarily the same reefs, but is stuff dying that we should be aware of or concerned about in the same way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's a big difference between the Great Barrier Reef and our environment in New Zealand. So reefs are built by corals, also animals, and they have photosynthetic algae living in them. If they get too hot, they get rid of their algae, and if they get rid of their algae too long, they basically can't eat and they die. So that's why the warming is such a big issue for reef organisms. In temperate marine environments, like here, like coast of California, like a lot of places around the world that are more kelp forest environments, the warming doesn't do the exact same thing. So if you have a marine heat wave, we had a big marine heat wave in California a few years ago, and the kelp died off, but kelp is one of the fastest growing organisms, so it can come back. So I'm gonna say I'm not sure, and I think one of the issues in New Zealand, the way I see it, is that we are not doing enough mapping of where are the kelp beds and where should they be. So good question. And I wouldn't say that our marine ecosystems are dying, but I would say it would be really good if we looked a little more carefully at what we can do to help them thrive. Because we know, okay, there probably used to be a lot more kai moana and Whakaraupō. There's less now, so I think it would be really good to have more of a conversation around how do we make sure our marine ecosystems are healthy. Hopefully I avoided answering your question, but still gave some information.
Oh, hi. Oh, fuck, I hate my voice. Jesus. My question's around obviously there's a lot of particulate in Lyttelton Harbour. Is that the same for the other bays in the area? Or is it mostly caused by vessel traffic?
Yeah, great question. Other people are working actively on the sedimentation rate question. And something I've been thinking about recently is okay, for sure, deforestation it just basically lets the soil drop into the harbor faster. So you have all this sediment coming in. Governor's Bay used to have a ferry going there. I don't think that's going to happen. And I was wondering if the dredging from the port is they might need to dredge more often because they have to keep up with the sediment load. And then I do think, of course, when the dredging happens, that's not great for some of the benthic marine life. Some of the other bays do have a lot less turbidity. If you go around to Akaroa, there is, you get more good diving days there. So I think it's an issue around Banks Peninsula, but it could be a little bit worse in Whakaraupō, but it's a good question, and I think other people may have better information on that, and I can give you their names. Great question.
Do you think we're going to hit the 30 by 30?
Oh,
And you might want to explain that.
great question. Okay, 30 by 30 is this UN, right, idea that we're going to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030, which is super ambitious and amazing. And I think we're either around like 8 or 12. I forget exactly where we are. We're far, but we are making a lot of progress. And this is like putting in marine protected areas to help our oceans, because what we find is that when there is no fishing in certain areas, when we like think about it hard and we're like, okay, this is a disturbed ecosystem. You know, in New Zealand, it might look like, oh, we have a kinna bed and no kelp in this area because we've fished out the larger fish, and then the kinna thrive, and then the kinna eat all the kelp. So that's a disturbed ecosystem. That's somewhere where maybe it might be appropriate to have a fishing closure for some amount of time. And then the fish can come back and start helping the ecosystem recover. So an MPA in places can help an ecosystem recover, and it tends to increase a lot of fish in the area around it as well. So usually, like, fishermen really like this too in the end, although not in the beginning. And so 30 by 30 is this super ambitious thing. The thing is, like, an MPA in your exclusive economic zone is kind of your call. Like, there are going to be people around the world working to put in MPAs to protect the ocean, but it's very, very political. Like, scientists are getting together and they're meeting up and they're like trying to convince certain countries to support protecting the ocean. So we could. I think if there's a big swell of public support, I think like the ocean documentary that's recently out, that's really good. Like, if we have a lot of media attention, we could do it, I think, for sure. It's just like, will we? And then you also have to have a little bit of teeth when you put in these marine protected areas. Like, in the open ocean, it is like the Wild West. Even if you have legal protection for like certain types of fishing gear, etc., is very hard to enforce. But yes, I think we can do it.
One more round of applause.